Welcome to It's Always Sunny in Downtown with your featured performer, Monkeybone. And here are the two other people next to Monkeybone. Why don't you introduce yourselves?
I'm Lugia. I can't think of a creative name for this.
I'm Patty, and yeah, I can't either.
And I'm Red. That was something. All right, let's jump into the news.
So the Wicked movie is releasing soon, and you know what that means? Merchandising. Oh yes, they got the picture's name on everything. Wicked the
course.
t-shirt, Wicked the coloring book, Wicked the lunchbox, Wicked the breakfast cereal, Wicked the flamethrower. The kids love this one. And last but not least, Wicked the doll. Now about those dolls. So there was a little bit of a controversy this past week, because the packaging on the box is a little bit of an oopsie. See, on the Wicked Mattel dolls, the box has a link to Wicked.com, when it should be to WickedMovie.com, because Wicked.com is
Porn
an
site.
adult site. And my question is,
Porn.
how
Does
the hell
YouTube
did this
censor that one?
happen? What?
I can tell you exactly how it happened. 4 months ago, Warner Brothers and Mattel announced that they would start using AI. So I am 90% certain this is an AI mix-up.
Okay, yeah, that would explain it.
I was gonna ask, there's got to be like somebody in the factory like making these links and like checking like the packaging, right?
You'd be surprised how little people who use AI actually check their work.
No, I
I
thought
don't
it
know
was
if you
like an
guys.
actual person doing it.
I think it was AI.
But the fact it's AI, if it is AI, that suddenly makes more sense. My question is, shouldn't there be somebody in the factory like checking the packaging and like seeing the links?
Maybe, but
I don't
like,
know. I've,
do you
I've
guys
never
remember
worked.
that
I've never
movie?
worked in factory production, so what do I know?
Listen, I can just tell you a lot that 90% of like the time people find out something is AI, it's because no one checked their work, which is like surprising common.
Like, do
That
you
Civil
remember
War
that
movie,
that
that
Loki
Civil War
poster
movie,
for season 2? Like, do you remember how
yeah,
like everyone said like the hands or not one of the hands, the numbers in Roman numerals on 4 was incorrect because it was AI
yeah.
generated?
Yeah, that was AI. When Francis Ford Coppola, Megalopolis, he had a bunch of like
Yeah, fake
whatchamacallit,
quotes.
fake movie
That was AI
quotes, and
generated.
no one
Yep.
checked to see if the quotes were real. The Civil War posters, no one checked like to see if like any of the locations generated were real. AI is not very clean. Let's say that. Let's be nice and say that.
Hmm.
Speaking of AI, actually, this transitions into one of my stories. Coca-Cola released their annual Christmas commercial, and it's AI, and everyone is pissed because the Coca-Cola Christmas commercial is kind of like it's kind of a big deal. Like every year, Coca-Cola usually like does something special, and like in England, for example, once the Coca-Cola Christmas commercial airs, a lot of people consider that to be like the start of the Christmas season. Is when everyone starts getting like ready and whatnot. It feels weird that this year the seasons are being brought by the AI overlords that will destroy us all.
I think by this point Twitter has also been like integrating AI for
Yeah,
learning.
yeah.
Yeah.
Grok, I think, is going to start taking images, and Blue Sky too, which is why a lot of artists are deleting their entire back catalog. Very dire, but I don't imagine it's going to last long because everyone using AI is fucking up. So like, eventually they're just going to stop, or they're going to learn how to be competent with it. Or you guys remember when, like, GMO foods were like a big thing that people cared about?
Vaguely.
And like
A little bit.
as a response to GMO foods, Whole Foods got made, which is like organic shit. I feel like there might be like a new Hollywood that's like no AI, no like added preservatives, no GMO, like that kind of shit. It's like, it's all practical. All the
One
stuff
more
we're
thing I
talking
want.
about is like very interesting to me, just because I feel like this is all very thematically relevant with the movie we're gonna be talking about. So, but
I
yeah,
got
go
one more
on.
thing I want to say about the Wicked stuff.
Yes.
So, Wicked.com is owned by Wicked Pictures, which makes a bunch of high quality porn movies that are like parodies of other things. Do you think from this whole situation they're gonna announce like a Wicked parody
Probably.
just cuz?
Probably.
It
I
would
did
all
not know
come full
Wicked
circle.
made parody porn films. I just knew that they were a porn site because I read the article. But okay, if they
I
make parody movies, that's
I
pretty funny.
gonna be honest, I've never heard of Wicked Pictures before
I haven't
this.
heard about either. We are a
And apparently
wholesome
they've been around for
Christian.
like 30 years, so
We are a wholesome Christian podcast. Even though I feel like multiple jokes I make gets cut every episode, but whatever. Wholesome Christian podcast.
I wouldn't say wholesome Christian because, nowhere David Lynch actually to transition for a second.
Yes, speaking of David Lynch, very unfortunately, David Lynch has effectively announced his retirement because he has contracted emphysema and cannot walk without an oxygen tank, which is a sad day for art. David Lynch is probably one of the greatest artists of his generation. He is like the only American artist that's held to like the same esteem as like Stanley Kubrick. Damn shame. I actually just started rewatching Twin Peaks the other day. Got Lynch on the mind, so that's very unfortunate. We've talked about him on the show before,
Quite a few times, in fact.
and I'm sure we'll talk about him again.
The
But
question
yeah,
is how soon, because I feel like David Lynch is one of those people I need to mentally prepare myself for.
don't worry. If
What was
I
the last one
recommend
that
him,
we
I'll
did?
tell
Wild at
you.
Heart?
Wild at
Yeah.
Heart, yeah.
That was like a
His
year or two
his
ago, right?
his remake of The
Mhm.
Wizard of Oz, correct. We done Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. I don't know when we're going to talk about them again. There are a few David Lynch movies where I don't think you need to mentally prepare yourself for. Elephant Man is like probably the most straightforward like movie he's made. In fact, Elephant Man feels like a Tim Burton movie. Like I generally think that like David Lynch and Tim Burton are very similar directors. It's just one went more commercial and one went more like abstract. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about them again. I feel like I'm probably gonna recommend Eraserhead one day. It's actually one of the only Lynch movies I haven't seen yet.
That's one that I've
Um,
wanted to see for a while.
a lot of my friends, it's their like favorite movie, and they aren't even like particularly like artsy people. But they're like Eraserhead and like Twin Peaks are like the two like Lynch movies that like it seems that like everyone seems to like. Like even though they're very like odd for some reason, like they're able to kind of capture a kind of mainstream audience, which is interesting to me. Anyway, speaking of directors who are getting fucked over, John Waters, who we haven't talked about on the show before, but we probably will too. But John Waters, he was gonna make a movie with Aubrey Plaza called Liar Mouth, and it has unfortunately been canceled. And I'm honestly kind of like so shocked that like because David Lynch wanted to get another movie made too, but he couldn't get funding. And this is like a frequent thing where like a lot of artists who are like big names and like you would think would be like their name alone would be a draw for some reason aren't getting funding, even though like in the age of streaming, all these companies are giving monies to like fucking anybody, but for some reason like these people aren't able to get money. That's very like shocking to me. Because like you'd think it'd be like a sure hit, because like you know for a fact that there's an audience for it, but I don't know. For some reason it's not happening. This entire news segment, we've basically just been talking about the death of art. Just very depressing now to think about it. Because it's like AI, merchandising, corporations not giving artists like freedom. And anyway, I think that all ties pretty well into Monkeybone, our movie for today.
Seamless.
That is
Seamless
actually a
transition.
very good transition, yeah.
So I'm gonna go into like the behind the scenes of this movie and everything soon, but just to like give an audience an idea, this movie is almost basically like just to give you a little synopsis of what the connection is. This movie is basically about like an artist who hates merchandising dying, and then basically his creation takes over his body, and sort of an act of self-preservation, sort of like fully embraces corporatizing, which I actually do think is like kind of a compelling statement because it's almost like all of us here we like the Flintstones here on this show, but let's be real, we learned about the Flintstones via like Fruity Pebbles and like shit like that. That's
And
how
the
we learned about
gummies.
it. So there is a kind of interesting statement about how merchandising does sort of keep franchises alive. But of course, there's always the counterpoint that everyone remembers Calvin and Hobbes, and he never sold out. But I don't know. You got the Peanuts, you got Calvin and Hobbes, and they're both kind of like an interesting argument. Where like Peanuts, they 100% were fully merchandise themselves and whatnot, and everyone knows them and Garfield and whatnot. But then you got Calvin and Hobbes, which didn't. But there's a lot of comics not like Calvin and Hobbes, which do get forgotten. And who knows what would have been forgotten without merchandising. So anyway, Monkeybone. So this movie was directed by Henry Selick. I'm sure everyone on this show is familiar with Henry Selick. We mentioned Tim Burton earlier. Henry Selick's probably best known for adapting one of Tim Burton's books into the film The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is why the movie says Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. It's the same reason Bram Stoker's Dracula is called Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's because like it's a source material thing, but because Tim Burton's a famous director, people get a little testy about that. But whatever. He's mostly known for adaptations, actually, because Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, which is an adaptation of Roald Dahl, Coraline, which is an adaptation of Neil Gaiman, and his recent movie, which was not an adaptation, but it was written by Jordan Peele. So he's mostly known for working with other people's material, including this one. This movie is an adaptation of the graphic novel called Darktown by Kaha Blackley. I have not read the comic, So we're not going to be talking about it in terms of adaptation. We're just going to be talking about it on its own. This movie came out 2001 by 20th Century Fox, the same year as Looney Tunes Back in Action. Not actually. 2 years before Looney Tunes Back in Action, but I feel they're very similar movies, but we'll get into that later. A little bit of background. Yeah, basically Henry Selick fell in love with the comic book, and he spent a considerable amount of time pursuing the rights. He wrote a letter to the author that said, "I've never felt any project was closer to my sensibilities than this one." Initially, it was going to be true to source material, but ultimately it kind of devolved into its own thing. Initially, the role of Monkeybone was going to be played by Ben Stiller, but Stiller dropped out to be in Mystery Men, which is another very odd film. Much of the film's art is inspired by Mark Ryden. For example, the bust of Abraham Lincoln, the Great Emancipator. A lot of Stu's like pre-therapy painting is similar to Ryden's painting The Birth. So basically, you know how H.R. Geiger was kind of like the inspiration for Alien.
Yeah.
Mark Ryden is kind of like the visual inspiration for this film, which is kind of interesting because like you can, because this is like an adaptation of a comic, so I guess like they sort of combined the comics art with Mark Ryden's, and The Nightmare Before Christmas is clearly inspired by like Tim Burton's art. So yeah, and also the animation style of like the opening sequence, all of that was inspired by the Swedish cartoonist Magnus Carlsen. A lot of names for the people at home to look up if they like how this movie looks, which I'm 100% sure most people do. That's like the one thing everyone likes about this movie. But yeah, the film's plot was obviously influenced by Roger Rabbit and Cool World and Beetlejuice. Pretty fucking obvious. I'm pretty sure, like that's immediately those are like the three movies that popped in my head when I started watching this. This movie was a box office bomb, but it has garnered a pretty significant cult following due to its creativity, and that's certainly how I heard of it. I already kind of went into the plot, so well, actually, I guess I'll go more into the plot. So basically, the plot of the movie is this man. He's about to make this hit cartoon, about to get an animated series, and people are sort of arguing with him about the whatchamacallit, the merchandising rights, but he unfortunately gets in a horrible accident, gets put in a coma. So while in the coma, he sort of ends up in this purgatory type state where people are basically finding out whether they die or they get to wake up and go back. Through here, he meets like a bunch of interesting characters, including Gustavo Fring himself, Giancarlo Esposito, which that was a surprise to see him. And then eventually, him and Monkeybone, they come up with a plan to sort of get him back to the world of the living. But at the last second, Monkeybone betrays him and decides to take over his body. Similar to sort of Jack Skellington, he sort of wants to like spread his own, or the dude from Little Shop of Horror, he kind of wants to like sort of spread his message and terrorize the children. Give kids nightmares, which I'm sure this movie gave a lot of kids nightmares. But yeah, and then so the rest of the movie is kind of like that Pixar movie Soul, where like a dude's sort of trying to get back into his body, and there's a cute little romance. Like I'm actually very surprised by how much I kind of like the romance in this movie. I did not think that would actually be kind of a highlight, because usually it's like the worst part of films like this. But yeah, Brass Tacks. I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys. I like this movie.
Really?
What did you guys think? Yeah.
I think it's almost
It's a
there.
mess.
It's
It's a mess.
almost good.
But
Not
it's a
a
mess, but it had like
but
it had enough going for it where it did connect with me. It maybe tried to do a bit too much and the tone was a bit off, but like I don't know. I liked it. I compared it to Looney Tunes Back in Action. I have similar feelings there. Where like I think Looney Tunes Back in Action is kind of a messy movie, but when it works, it's really charming.
Okay, where do I even begin? I feel like Monkeybone is a very unfocused film. Okay, so the first act is basically kind of like Brendan Fraser is in his coma and he's trying to like get out, and he meets up with Monkeybone and they both work together to get the exit pass. It kind of felt like they were breezing through that part of the story in like record time, because
Yeah.
after the bar and dance scene, Stu becomes very acquainted with his surroundings and Monkeybone. I'm like, that was honestly really fast. I feel like we might have missed a couple scenes.
I think it might have been a time skip because at one point he says he's tired of martinis, but
No, it literally is
It is a
time
time
skip.
skip.
Yeah.
It is a time
yeah,
skip.
we don't know how much time has passed.
No,
3
because
months.
in
there's no
in the
there's
hospital,
no
3 months.
indication in downtown.
They say 3 months. It's exactly 3 months.
because in the
And he waited
hospital,
3 months to do
the
something?
sister, she says like, we made a promise that we won't like lay in our
Let
deathbed
him
for
suffer.
too long. Yeah.
Yeah, he's like, the doctor's basically like, in 3 months, if he doesn't wake up, he's probably gonna be dead. So that's the time limit. It's like, you got 3 months. And I thought the movie was gonna be like him, like, exploring this town, like, in those 3 months. It was gonna be like a Majora's Mask type thing. But, like, no, they kind of get rid of that, like, really quick. Like, after the
It
first
just,
act,
3
and the
months
rest of
go
the movie
by
is
in
more
the
of, like,
span of minutes, and I was
Yeah, that
so
was-
thrown off by that.
That was
yeah,
disappointing.
it's more of, like, the best way I can describe it is, like, after the first act, the movie basically becomes, like, half of it is, like, Face Off, where, like, you have this one dude trying to kind of fucking up this dude's life by pretending to be him, and the second half of the movie is, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like,
Part of me
it's like
got
a dude
like
exploring
the
his
Mask
magical world.
vibes because of
Yeah,
how
it's-
tiny
it's
the
kinda got,
adventure's
like,
trying to
vibes of
be
Mask,
like
yeah.
as Monkeybone.
Like, this movie feels like 12 movies I've seen before kind of mashed together. Like when Brendan Fraser, like, is in, like, the Monkeybone, like, world or whatever, Darktown, downtown. That stuff kind of remind me of, like, Coco, like that Pixar movie Coco, where, like, there's, like, a little bit of a, like, there's kind of like a ghoulish, like, element to it. Nightmare Before Christmas, like, all those, like, sort of wacky worlds about, like, a dude getting sucked into, like, this crazy little world. Part of it reminded me of Defending Your Life. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie.
No.
Because Defending Your Life is about a dude who dies and then he goes into, like, purgatory, and basically, you know how, like, God judges you, like, when you go to heaven or hell, that kind of thing. So basically, the premise of the movie is like, okay, so God judges you whether you go to heaven or hell, but you do get a lawyer. So that's kind of like the gag of the movie, where, like, this dude's, like, on trial for his life or whatever. But it kind of reminded me of that. I part of me almost thought it was gonna be like that, but, like, then there's the romance element, so I thought it was like maybe it's gonna be like a sort of like Eternal Sunshine, like a Spotless Mind type thing, or like Christmas Carol type thing. But like overall, it kind of seemed like this movie had, like, a lot of ideas, but it doesn't actually focus on any one of them.
The biggest culprit is definitely Hypno, which is Giancarlo Esposito's character, because the reason why Monkeybone is going into the real world in place of Stu is so that he could like fill up all the Monkeybone dolls with like nightmare gas and give people nightmares. But
Yeah.
I feel like that goal was kind of forgotten about because it's clear that the movie wants to focus on Monkeybone just being the bad guy and trying to preserve himself in a world where he doesn't really exist.
I feel
Actually,
like there's
I have a
this
question
movie has,
about
like,
that.
so many, like, interesting themes, but, like, it just barely touches. Like I mentioned earlier about the whole corporate thing, and I thought that this was almost gonna go in, like, a Little Shop of Horrors type direction with, like, I need to, like, spread my thing out to, like, survive, or, like, this kind of corporate thing, like, this need to, like, constantly, like Monkeybone's kind of desire to sort of, like, merchandise himself. I thought, like, they're gonna do, like, a Little Shop of Horrors things there, and, like, because even that's, like, a bit of an evil thing. But
here's the
instead, like, they
thing.
kind of, like, almost, like, I don't think they forget about it, like, because, like, he like, does, like, inject the nightmare juice and, like, the Monkeybone dolls, and, like,
Yeah,
but
but, like,
they do
afterwards,
sort of, like,
I
forget
think
about it
the
after
last
that.
time you see his Hypno is when he scolds Monkeybone for having a dream about staring at women's asses. I think it's also established that Death and Hypno are brother and sister, but there's also like no repercussions for Hypno's actions for taking over the real world with the nightmare gas.
If this was, like, a trilogy of movies, like, the first movie would be about him, like, whatchamacallit,
Getting the exit pass.
whatchamacallit, yeah, him getting the exit pass, and then, like, oh, the plot twist of the movie is Monkeybone turns evil. Then the
And that would
second
just
one
be a
would be this,
cliffhanger
like,
for the second one, yeah.
yeah, and then the second one would be like him trying to, like, escape and after Monkeybone, while Monkeybone started creating this, like, sort of corporate thing. Like, it's basically two movies into
The
one.
third
'Cause, like,
movie is him as the Olympian trying to get his body back.
no, but I
Okay,
think it could just be like two movies. But, like, it
I'm
definitely
gonna
feels
say-
like two movies that got crammed into one.
I got a few things I want to say. I think this movie is almost good. Like, I love the visual style. I love the ideas. The
Every design is, like, one of the
execution-
greatest designs I've seen in my life.
Yeah, no, it's a great looking film. But yeah, the execution is like all over the place. So start somewhere. I thought this movie would have delved more into Stu's psyche because it's established that he had all these nightmares when he was a kid and he made like drawings of them, but then he started drawing with his other hand and he became a successful cartoonist from it. So I thought this would be like those images from his childhood are like back in his adult life and he needs to
They
like,
are. I mean, that is
There
like
was-
apparently
Yeah.
all
like it's
that is
there,
kind
but
of
like
it's like
kind again, it's kind of there, but they don't really go anywhere with
The
it.
only time I can recall they did that was when they were trying to run away from death, and Stu accidentally like goes into a nightmare wall where he sees one of his drawings, and he's like the bug like on the table, and he's about to have surgery done on himself before Monkeybone saves him. I think
Yeah,
that's like
I
the
thought that
only
was like
time
a
they do that.
funny bit too.
Not only that, but Stu doesn't have an arc. Like it's not like he was greedy and him being in the afterlife, he needs to like learn to appreciate his girlfriend. From the beginning, he didn't want anything to do with Monkeybone anymore. And at the end of the movie, he still doesn't, even though they're fused. But he doesn't really act any different when they're fused. So like, what's the takeaway?
I mean, it's a little hard to make a comatose person change their personality.
But to go back, him in the Olympian's body got a huge laugh out of me because of like how he's
Yeah, that was
flailing
really funny.
around.
Yeah,
And he has to like get like the stick like to prop his head up and duct tape himself. That was
that's
funny, but the doctors chasing after him felt a bit much.
They
Like it
just
didn't
wanted the
match the tone of the
Yeah.
organs.
rest of it.
I have you guys have seen Men in Black, right? I feel like the
Yeah.
The
funniest
first one.
parts. Yeah, the funniest parts with like the corpse is like the same gags that they would do in like Men in Black with the bug guy, where he's like, Vincent D'Onofrio's like walking all fucking weird because like he's very clearly like a dead guy that's being controlled by like a monster.
You know what's
Like
funny? So I was talking about Monkeybone with a friend just yesterday. And one of the first things she brought up was that scene where Brendan Fraser like inhabits the body of a dead athlete, and how like he has to put a pull to make him have good posture. His neck keeps breaking all the time. Some of his organs are flying out. He has an incision. That was one of the moments that turned her off from the movie. And it's kind of interesting
Really?
how like that was one of your favorite moments.
Honestly, I thought that was the funniest the movie got because everything else, like, it didn't land for me, I'll be honest.
I actually didn't mind the writing too much when it wasn't just gross out humor.
Like the visual gags were funny. I like when Whoopi Goldberg's head explodes and they have to screw a new one
Yeah.
on. Like that got a chuckle. But like the dialogue stuff that didn't land.
To
for
compare
me.
it to something, this is definitely funnier than Furry Vengeance, and I think Brendan Fraser did a good job of what he was given. Like, it's clear that he's trying to be Jim Carrey in some spots, but I think it still worked for what it was.
Overall, this movie is like probably like peak creativity fodder. Like I feel like if you're like a cartoonist or you're like if you're ever like scrapped for ideas, I feel like watching this movie would probably give you like a million ideas because this movie has a million ideas and it doesn't develop any of them. But like, to any aspiring creatives watching this, just watch this movie, pull one idea from it and just like make that your whole thing and you'll probably create a pretty good movie.
Also, we failed to mention
right.
the biggest part of Monkeybone, his inception. It all
No, we
happened.
didn't.
What?
We did talk about that.
No, like where Monkeybone came from in lore, like in the
Oh.
cartoon.
He switched his drawing hands. That's literally the explanation.
No, in the context of the show.
Oh, okay, what is it? I
Oh.
forgot.
It's a boner, hence the name
Oh.
Monkeybone. And I slapped myself on the head for not even making that connection.
Speaking of boners, what did you guys think of the cat girl?
She was also kind of an underdeveloped character. I mean, that's kind of a given
Yeah, she
for
was
this
odd.
movie.
I was wondering like what her deal was. I thought that was like almost his like kind of like imagination of his wife or something, but like they don't do anything with her. And I was like I kept thinking like it was gonna be like some sort of psychological thing where he's like kind of like that's sort of like how he views his wife or something, but like they do nothing with her and her eyes really creep me out. I don't know what makeup they did around her eyes, but they bother me.
And considering that she's played by Rose McGowan, knowing what happened to her and how Monkeybone treats her, it's even more uncomfortable. Is that all?
I believe so.
Yeah. So
All right,
ultimately, it's a
Lugia.
recommendation. Maybe we're not a good movie, but it's a recommendation for most of us.
I promise you this one will be good this time.
No, I like the month where we all just kind of picked like bad but interesting movies.
I think the flawed movies are more interesting to talk about personally.
Well, no one talks about them to begin with, so it's nice to have like a unique perspective on them.
I feel like this year, most of the stuff we talked about, we had stuff to say. We're not talking about like all-time classics or anything. We are talking about relatively strange films, and even like the all-time classics we talk about, like our Godfather episode, we actually had like a decent to talk about because that movie has a lot of meat to it. So like,
Well, we were also talking about all three of them.
yeah, but like we didn't really talk about the third one, and that's like the flawed one the most. Like most of our discussion was on the first two, which are the good ones. So it depends, I think. Our Hong Kong 97 review was pretty short because even though it was like a kind of interesting movie, there wasn't like much to say.
I
So,
guess, but like sometimes it's hard for me to talk about a movie I'm not passionate about. So
but like passion to me, like a good movie and a bad movie can inspire passion. That's sort of like what my kind of barometer in movies are, because like people are like, it's okay, like it's not bad, but like to me, a movie that's bad but inspires passion to me is better than a movie that's okay but inspires nothing. You know?
Right.
Like movies I would give like a 5 or a 6 to. I generally think I care about less than movies I'd give lower scores to. But what movies other people would give, because the way I score is kind of differently, because I do score just based on how much it
and
interests me. Like
I
like
don't
I give
score. I've
Monkey Bone
never
a
scored.
7.
You guys know
I
this. Even
I mean yeah, but like we do thumbs up and thumbs down. Like that's how we've been doing this podcast
Well,
for like a few years
I've
now.
been
Thumbs
doing
up,
I give
numbered
thumbs down.
scores.
I give adjectives.
Yeah. Anyway, what's your choice, Lugia?
All right. It's already November, and we kind of went through October without doing any horror movies to my knowledge, so I figured I may as well just squeeze one in just for the sake of it. And
Okay.
this is a movie from a series that I've been getting into fairly recently, and I also know that Patrick is not familiar with it at all, so I want to see like what he thinks of it. So for next week, we are going to be watching The Evil Dead from 1981 by Sam Raimi.
Ah, okay.
Do you want us to watch the other movies too? Because I've seen all of them, and I'm probably gonna mention things from the other ones.
If that's the case, then sure. I haven't seen the third one, but I wouldn't mind.
All right.
There's
I
3
have
of
not
them?
seen the remake, by the way. I've only seen the original 3.
Yeah, just if we're gonna do more of them, just the trilogy. Let's not extend further beyond that.
Yeah, just the Raimi movies, like the ones he actually made,
It'll be just like our Spider-Man trilogy review, which was
which was
also
also
Sam
Raimi.
Raimi.
Sam Raimi loves making trilogies. Yeah, I've seen this trilogy multiple times, so this is gonna be a fun episode.
I saw the musical fairly recently, and I was surprised how much they
I've
lumped
also seen the
together.
musical.
Yeah, they lumped together a
Yeah.
lot of elements from, well, mainly the first two, and they kind of just brushed past the third one.
The third one's like so different that like most people kind of ignore it. Like I've seen the Ash versus Evil Dead show also like mostly ignores the third one.
Also,
Although I think that was a rights issue, not really. Yeah.
also since we are going
Which
to
is
watch
weird
all
because
three
the
of
third
them,
movie.
Patrick, you have to keep in mind that they're named kind of differently. So the first movie is The Evil Dead, the second movie is Evil Dead 2, and the third one is Army of Darkness.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like the Rambo trilogy. I don't know why they do that.
Yeah. Also, there's not gonna be much like real continuity with them. Like they're vaguely connect. Like Evil Dead 2 is basically a remake of Evil Dead 1, if we're being honest.
More or less, yeah. And I think the third movie ties into 2 more than 1.
Guess we'll close it out now. Um.
Monkeybone.
All right. Yeah. Cut it. Just cut it there. That's good.